debate, the Honourable Member for Nanaimo-Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will be splitting my time today with the member for Edmonton-Griesbach. I would first like to take a moment to acknowledge that my riding in Nanaimo-Ladysmith is located on the traditional territories of the Snanamik, Snuneymuxw, Snuneymuxw, and the Layakson First Nations. As my first speech in this chamber, I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the people of Nanaimo-Ladysmith for putting their trust in me. Serving them as their Member of Parliament is a true honor. I want to say a special thank you again to my friends, dedicated campaign team, and volunteers who worked tirelessly to get me here today. They really did. I want to also thank my NDP colleagues for their endless support day after day, and the member for Burnaby South, who I watch inspire new generations to get involved in the political process. I endeavor to do the same. I would also like to thank my predecessor, Paul Manley, who worked hard to represent Nanaimo-Ladysmith prior to my being elected. I'm grateful for now MLA and Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Sheila Malcolmson, and my predecessor, Jean Crowder, who both paved the way for me being here today with you all. Most importantly, I would like to thank my family and especially my two amazing children, Michaela and Wyatt. There's so many more that I would like to thank, but with so little time, I will only say that I'm here today because of the support of so many, and I want to say a big thank you. My riding in Nanaimo-Ladysmith is located on, it's a beautiful island riding, located on the west coast of British Columbia. And while I'm happy to be here today working on behalf of the people of Nanaimo-Ladysmith, the difficulties being faced by my constituents, as for too many Canadians, are immense. There are many critical issues Nanaimo-Ladysmith is dealing with. With the time I have, I will focus on just a few of these. But over the coming weeks and months as we're here together, however, I hope to talk about and act on the many important issues impacting the constituents of Nanaimo-Ladysmith. People in Nanaimo-Ladysmith are struggling to find a place to call home. I'm hearing from young families who have little hope of ever purchasing their first home. Hardworking members of my riding who have lost their homes as a result of job insecurity. And seniors living off low income struggling to pay rent. I see firsthand the impacts of unaffordable and inaccessible housing in my riding. I'm often asked by constituents in my riding, when did we forget that housing is a basic human right, not a financial commodity for investors? I think of a constituent in my riding who talked to me about her recent renoviction from her home. She was left with two options: rent at double the price or become homeless. This constituent's income remained fixed while her rent doubled. And she's not alone. Constituents in my riding are asking when this government will live up to its promises to provide safe and truly affordable housing to Canadians in the communities where they live and work. I hear daily in my riding stories of people unable to make ends meet as a result of the cost of living and housing. Nobody should have to choose between having food in their fridge or a roof over their heads. As the costs of housing continue to increase, so does the number of people in my riding experiencing homelessness. In Nanaimo's 2020 point-in-time count, for example, that was completed prior to the COVID lockdown, homelessness had increased almost 150% in the previous 4 years. And the COVID pandemic has just made this situation worse. Almost 1/3 of the unhoused population counted identified as being First Nations, Métis, or of Indigenous ancestry. Now, more than ever, we need to work alongside Indigenous communities to develop housing for Indigenous people and with Indigenous people. We know the overrepresentation of Indigenous people amongst Nanaimo-Ladysmith's unhoused population is the result of over 150 years of systemic racism. The ongoing discovery of unmarked graves of Indigenous children are but one example of the attempted genocide of Indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, acts of racism continue today. Just one example in my riding of Nanaimo-Ladysmith is the continued overrepresentation of Indigenous youth in the foster care system. And children, of course. A history of stripping Indigenous people of their land, culture, language, and community has taken its toll, and such racist acts continue today. Thankfully, there are organizations in my riding doing great work. Tilikum-Lalem Friendship Center, for example, in my riding is one of them. They have been providing essential services to urban Indigenous people for over 50 years, picking up the pieces as a result of federal inaction for too long. The calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission need to be more than just words on paper. Despite the promises made to Indigenous people, this government is still taking Indigenous children to court, failing to ensure Indigenous communities have access to safe drinking water, and has yet to implement the calls to justice of the inquiry of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2SL LGBTQIA+ people. People in Nanaimo-Ladysmith are seeing firsthand the impacts of the climate crisis. Through the summer, British Columbians faced some of the worst drought conditions and hottest days ever recorded in the province's history. From one extreme to the next, British Columbia is now experiencing some of the worst flooding ever seen. Of those most impacted by flooding in Nanaimo-Ladysmith are the Indigenous nations. The challenges already faced by the First Nations in my riding have only been compounded by the rising waters. Homes that were already insufficient in number and in much need of repair now also have significant flood damages. Inadequate and delayed supports are not what these nations or other British Columbians impacted by the floods need from this government. I'm hearing loud and clear from the constituents of Nanaimo-Ladysmith, if we are going to protect the planet, not just for people today, but for the next generation, we must act now. We need to do whatever it takes to limit the impacts of the climate crisis, to build more resilient communities, and to transition to a clean energy future where workers are not left behind. We know the Liberal government spends over $4.8 billion each year on subsidies to fossil fuel companies. We need to end these subsidies now and instead invest these billions in just sustainable, renewable energy sources. We must have the courage to act today to fight the climate crisis. And we need our actions to match the scale and urgency of this crisis. Too many young people, including my own children, tell me that they are fearful for their futures. We need to do better. All our futures depend on it. While constituents in Nanaimo-Ladysmith feel the impacts of the climate crisis and a housing crisis, my riding is also suffering through an opioid crisis. Too many family members, friends, and neighbors have tragically lost their lives in the opioid crisis. How many more lives need to be lost before we start taking this opioid crisis seriously? Not only was there no mention of the opioid crisis in the throne speech, but ongoing inaction has resulted in over 1,500 deaths in British Columbia and 39 in Nanaimo alone. Constituents in Nanaimo-Ladysmith want and deserve action on the opioid crisis now. As a coastal member of Parliament and my party's critic for fisheries and oceans, I'm deeply concerned about the wild salmon population and the effect the recent flooding has had on it. The Liberal speech failed to promise the critical investment and awareness that is desperately needed to save this species, which is in critical shape. I will continue to push the government for this help and will work with First Nation communities, provinces, and territories to address this crisis. Again, while these issues are by no means exhaustive, and this list of issues, it's by no means an exhaustive list, of the issues I've heard on the doorstep in Nanaimo-Ladysmith, I'm committed to working as hard as I can for the people in my communities across Nanaimo-Ladysmith and all communities across Canada. This Parliament should be larger than the sum of its parts, and I want to see us act like it. We are facing such critical challenges and need to work together to overcome them. Thank you, Madame Speaker. Merci.